Everything is good until it's not, and everything works until it doesn't. This is No Singular Solutions. Welcome to the No Singular Solutions podcast. My name is Joshua Hoyt, and I believe that no matter what you've been through, you can still achieve greatness and help others along the way. I created this podcast to help you with your self-awareness and self-discovery. Ultimately, I want you to be authentically impactful. A little change to the format of the podcast. On my website, nosingular-solutions.com, under the tab podcast, I've created a Feedback on Fives forum for you to fill out with your name, email, and your question for me. My plan is that every fifth episode that I put out, so episode 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on, I want to spend that entire episode answering the questions that you, the listeners, send in to me. Today's episode, we're going to talk about vulnerability. The most important thing about vulnerability is I need to lead through example. I need to open up. I need to share what it is that makes me authentically unique. Vulnerability is who we are, not who we show up as. Being vulnerable is scary. It means you're exposed. It means you're talking about who you are, who you want to be, what your goals are, what you aspire to be. Being vulnerable opens you to judgment and criticism. But that's the real you. That's the insecure you. That's your flaws. That's your imperfections, your inadequacies. Being vulnerable is about looking internally and realizing who you really are, and then setting a plan for who you want to be. We need to embrace that. We need to embrace our vulnerability. I remember in high school, I read a book by Dennis Rodman. It was called Bad as I Want to Be. And his quote in that book was, "Don't let what other people think decide who you are." Don't let what other people think decide who you are. Show up as you. Be vulnerable. Embrace yourself. Embrace your flaws, your insecurities, your imperfections. Embrace your past. Being vulnerable means that you can continue to show up as the uniquely individual person that you are. Now, most of you listening to this podcast know who I am. You know what I do for work. We might have a relationship, but it makes this podcast very personable. It makes it very relatable, because what you hear in the podcast is the same person that shows up that you see in the community within our relationships. You get to see the outside. You get to see the action. You get to see the output of how I show up. But to be vulnerable, I need to tell you a story. I need to tell you the real story about what made Joshua Hoyt Joshua Hoyt. And I hope that inspires you to be vulnerable and to embrace who you really are and ultimately become the person that you can be. I grew up in Mankato. I bounced around through 3 different schools between kindergarten and 5th grade. I was at one school for kindergarten, another for 1st, and another 2nd through 4th. We ended up moving here to the Lakeville, Farmington area the summer of '89. It was the summer before 5th grade. Used to find myself riding my bike into Farmington. We lived within the school district, and so our friends were basically the kids in the trailer park and then the kids that we went to school with. And the thing that I remember most is the simplicity of life. We didn't have a whole lot. We lived in a 16 by 80 trailer. Parents worked hard. They provided, but we had what was in front of us. Somewhere along that lines of growing up through elementary school and middle school, I realized that I wanted more. Not that what I had in front of me wasn't enough or it wasn't sufficient. I just wanted more. The thing that I clung to first was food. I was a hungry kid. I had a high metabolism. I used to like to eat a lot. And so one school lunch wasn't enough for me. And so the summer after seventh grade, I took my first job drywalling with my neighbor David. Got paid $3.50 an hour cash, learned how to hang a 5/8 inch piece of fire rock by hand, learned how to mud and tape. I did it so that I ultimately had money that I could turn around and buy a second school lunch. I wanted more. The neighbor lady across the street, her name was Fran. She used to run all the time. She would go out, she'd run around the block a bunch of times and time herself. For some reason, I was drawn to run. I was drawn to running. And so I started doing it. I realized that as an individual effort, I didn't have to depend on anybody. There wasn't a team that I had to worry about somebody else helping or being a part of it. It was something that I got to do individually by myself. I got to measure myself against myself. If I could run faster, I was doing better. Eventually, that turned into a high school career. Ended up running track 4 years in high school, did very well, 4-year letter winner, loved it. I absolutely enjoyed it. Not that I wasn't a good teammate, but I really just wanted to depend on myself. There was this chip on my shoulder that like I could continue to be better and push myself. And again, it wasn't that I didn't want to be part of a team, but I didn't want to depend on anybody. I wanted to depend on myself. I wanted to be the best that I could be. And I found individual sports was the best way for me to do that. But my junior year in high school, we had our high school football homecoming game. And that week, my girlfriend at the time and I had decided that we were going to break up, and she wanted to go to the homecoming dance and I didn't. And I ultimately ended up going to the dance kind of despite her. And I ended up meeting somebody named Becky. We had met earlier that week through some homecoming events, but really it was like we danced and that was like the start of a relationship. Well, fast forward 3 weeks after we started dating, she had a softball-sized tumor in her throat and was diagnosed with lymphoma. Ended up going up to United Methodist Hospital. She was in ICU. And so, here's this person who I'd started a relationship with, and 3 weeks into it, ultimately had cancer. And that became the foundation of the relationship. I was a junior, she was a senior. And we built a relationship on going through radiation and going through chemo, shaving her head, doing all of the things that are customary to going through cancer treatment. I struggled with it for a while. I always had the option to like walk away, and she didn't. It was something that she was dealing with. And we had parted ways for a little bit, later on that year. We rekindled, we pulled things back together, my senior year for a while. But after I'd gotten out of high school, she had started college, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I had thought about pre-law, pre-med, and I'd looked at going into St. John's University, but our connection, our ties had started to really grow. Our relationship got a lot deeper, and she was at a point where her cancer had gone into remission. And so she's in her second year of college. And again, I had just graduated high school. Her cancer came back. And so Becky and I had a conversation about, what that looked like and what moving forward, in a relationship looked like. And the thing that we had talked most about was like health benefits. That at the time, this would have been summer or fall of 97, health benefits didn't cover you after the age of 18 unless you were a full-time enrollee in college. Like basically you had to be a student to have your health insurance benefits. Well, she no longer could go to school. And so she was coming home, and we had talked about going into the military. Like, here, let's get married. We can go in the military, and then wherever I end up, they'll be forced to cover your health benefits. And so, funny story, I'll tell at a later time about how I ended up in the Marine Corps, but basically my recruiter had convinced me not to get married before I enlisted, because he said, the Marine Corps is going to find out that, your wife has cancer, and they're going to find a reason to disqualify you. You've got 13 weeks of boot camp, and at the end of the day, you're going to end up getting kicked out, and then this thing isn't going to work. So we had agreed that I'd go to boot camp, and when I come back from boot camp, we'll get married, and then they'll cover your benefits and everything will be fine. Well, I get through the majority of boot camp, and I believe it was like the Monday or Tuesday of graduation week. So I was set to graduate that Friday. I had made a call home, and I had learned that she had passed like 2 weeks earlier, and I was crushed. Like, I was absolutely devastated. Here I am in San Diego, California, finishing up Marine Corps boot camp, and the whole reason that I was there had now been taken away from me. So I get through graduation, I fly home. I remember getting off the plane, walking through the terminal. I see my mom and my dad standing there, and the first thing I said to them was, "I know about Becky." And the look on their face of like utter disappointment that somehow they had failed me is something that'll never leave my mind. The thing about it, though, was like I was robbed of an opportunity. I was robbed of the opportunity to have closure because I didn't go to the funeral. I wasn't a part of any of the wake, the funeral, anything. It was taken from me. I come to find out that they had contacted my recruiter after Becky had passed, and he had basically encouraged them to not tell me for fear that if I left boot camp and came home, that I wouldn't return. And so I had a lot of resentment. I resented my parents for a long time. I resented my recruiter, and I even resented the Marine Corps because the whole reason I was there was for somebody else, and now she's gone. And I'm stuck in this 5-year commitment, and I was pissed. It wasn't good. I go through combat training. I finished up my time at home. I go through combat training, and I end up going to Pensacola, Florida. At the time, my job skill was supposed to be air traffic control. Well, air traffic control is one of the hardest schools. It had like a 36% attrition rate. A lot of people flunked out of it, couldn't hack it. We had to go through a flight physical. And part of that physical is you had to sit down in front of 3 naval officers and clear a psych eval. Well, I lost it. I absolutely lost it. I was not mentally fit to start school. It was the first time that I really started to go through grieving, and they ended up sending me to Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. And I spent a few weeks there, just talking to doctors, trying to work through, the grief and the loss. And, you're only 18 years of age at the time. And so you're trying to figure a lot of things out. Well, I felt I was good. Everything was good. And so they cleared me, and I started air traffic control school, and I used it as motivation. I was like, if I'm going to be here, I'm going to show up the best that I can, and I'm going to put myself all into it. So I got into the books, got very proficient, ended up graduating number 1 in my class. I was honor grad, got a meritorious promotion out of it, and finished school. And so the end of year of 98, I come home, I spend about 10 days at home, and then I go to my first duty station in Beaufort, South Carolina. And I spend the first couple of months in 99, just getting proficient, learning the job, working on qualifications. And to kind of set the date, Becky had passed on April 9th of 1998. So Saturday, April 3rd of 1999, I come home from shift. I had worked a 6:30 to 2:30, and I come home. And that day, I walked into my barracks, and I looked at my black Sony wireless phone that was sitting on my nightstand, and there was a flashing indicator that I had a message. So I pick up the phone at air. Like, there's nothing. The call is there, like I have a voice message, but there's nothing. It's just dead air. And I hang up the phone, and I'm like, okay, whatever, wrong number. And it was a few hours later that my mom called me, and she's like, your dad and I got into a fight. He left, and I don't know where he is. He didn't take the vehicle. He left the house. He walked. And I said, well, I don't know. You're being difficult, whatever. You got into a fight. He's probably over at a friend's house. He's going to have some beers, do stupid stuff. He'll be home in the morning. So Sunday morning, the 4th, I get another phone call from my mom. I think it was like 8 or 9 o'clock. And she said, your dad never came home last night. It's like, okay, that's really weird. Call the police, file a missing persons report, just start going through the process. Well, at the same time, she had contacted the Red Cross because my dad was technically missing. She had contacted the Red Cross. They get me on a flight, and I was home early that afternoon on Sunday the 4th. And he's legit missing. Like, just decided not to come home. He's missing. Nobody knows where he's at. Nobody had talked to him. He was just gone. And so we started looking for him. And on Monday the 5th, I went out with Scott Peterson, one of my dad's good friends. We started looking around. We went through some fields close to where the house was, and nothing. It was like, okay, let's go see if we can find him. Well, we can't find him, so let's go back to the house. We turned onto the street to come up to where my mom and dad lived at the time. This was the house that I had lived in before I left for the Marine Corps. And there was one of our squad cars from the local police station sitting out front. And I had this just wrecking feeling in my stomach that something wasn't right. And so we pull up to the driveway, we get out of the vehicle, walk through the front door, and I look at the top of the stairs, and it's my mom, my sister, a couple of my dad's friends. His brothers were there, which would be my uncle, or one of my uncles was there. And the look on my mom's face said everything. The police chief at the time was standing there at the top of the stairs, and I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, we found your dad." And I just remember like, oh my God, there's no way. And the first thing that came to my mind was, what's next? And that's what I said. I remember turning to the police chief and my mom, and I said, what's next? What do we need to do? Do I need to go down to the PD and identify the body? Like, procedurally, what do we do? Remember, I'm a kid. I'm a teenager. I a year removed from high school. Like, life is supposed to be happening. And then now, like, my dad is gone. And I was crushed. But that wasn't the time to show it. That wasn't the time to be vulnerable. That was the time to be the strong man of the house and to take care of the family and take care of everything that was there. Well, that was Monday the 5th. So his official date of death was April 3rd. But that Friday was the day that we buried my dad. So we went out to Fort Snelling. We had the ceremony. April 9th of 1999 is a day that I do not wish on anyone, not even my worst enemy. It's the day that I buried my dad, and it was the 1-year anniversary of Becky dying from cancer. The day that I don't ever want to relive again, the day that I don't want anyone to ever have to go through. That day messed me up more than anything that has ever happened in my life. This is a time where we didn't talk about mental health. We didn't talk about problems. We compartmentalized. We kept things to ourselves. That set on a whole slew of things that would happen over the next basically 10 to 15 years of trying to figure out who I was, what my place was, without a dad, without a positive role model of a male in my life. I didn't have it. And so I had to figure a lot of things out on my own. The VA wasn't overly supportive with mental health. The systems that employers had were not the greatest. There wasn't somebody who just kind of took me under their wing and said, "Come on, kid, let's go get you squared away and let's get you figured out." I dealt with it on my own, and it wasn't healthy. And it wasn't until about 10 years, it was 10, 12 years after that, because I had my first child and then, went on obviously to have a second child. But it wasn't until after I started having kids that I started to embrace what grieving of losing a parent actually meant and how you deal with all of the emotions of this tragic death that had happened with Becky and not being there, not being a part of it in her final days or even to have that closure. And then to a year later to the day, go through something so deeply emotional for your parent. Like, just words can't even explain it. But it also created a certain amount of resiliency within me. It taught me so many things about just how to show up in life. It taught me that I had to find a way to redirect the negative things that were going on in my head and turn it into a positive. And, one might think that it's a mask. It's something that you wear when you're in public so that people don't see who the real you is. And that works for a while. But you can't outrun trauma. You cannot. Time doesn't solve everything. You have to talk to somebody. You have to get involved with a psychologist, a psychiatrist, professional help. You have to start to let emotions go, even a decade later. And I don't tell you this story. I tell you this story to be vulnerable so that you know that it's possible, that you know that you can look inside no matter what your story is, no matter what you've been through, no matter what your experiences are, what your scars are. We all have them. Everybody has a story. My story isn't worse than yours. My story isn't more heartbreaking than yours. My story is not more tragic than yours. My story is uniquely mine. It's mine. It's not something anybody can ever take from me. It's not something that is put on a scale to measure level of severity. The story is mine. It's my experience. It's what I went through. It's what turned me into who I am today. It opened my eyes to so many different things that life has to offer. It opened my eyes to how I need to show up for other people. It created this platform. It created the opportunity for me to say, I got all this crap going on in my head, good and bad, that I need to verbalize. I need to put out there. I need to be vulnerable. And you know what? I'm okay failing in doing that. I'm okay being judged by other people. It doesn't bother me. God will judge me. You can tell me anything you want. You can tell me you don't like me. You can tell me you don't like my opinion. You can tell me my podcast sucks. At the end of the day, none of that is going to determine what I do going forward. I could do 2 episodes. I could do 200 episodes. Whenever the time comes that I think enough is enough and I feel like I've had a big enough impact, I'm going to do the next thing. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep putting this out there. I'm going to keep putting content out. I'm going to keep putting myself in a situation where I'm vulnerable, I'm exposed, I'm raw, it's real, because I know there are so many people out there that can relate to it. There are so many people who show up in their lives every single day and they're not who they actually are. They're putting that face on. They're putting the mask on. They're being somebody that everybody else expects them to be, and they're not showing up as themselves. And that's a disservice to yourself. That's a disservice to society. The best thing that you can do for yourself is to be you, whatever that looks like. I'm not going to judge you. I hope nobody else judges you. I hope you have the courage and the strength to show up exactly who you are and embrace whatever it is that you've been through in your life. It's your unique story. It is uniquely yours. It is not something that anybody else can take away from you. Who cares what other people think or say? I sure as heck don't. That's what I want to do. And that's what I hope this podcast does. It took me so long to be able to do this, but now that I have, I can't tell you how liberating and free it feels to be able to talk publicly about something that was so deeply personal and intimate to me, something that hurt so incredibly bad, can turn around and create an inspiration for others to change their lives. I put my first podcast out last week. In less than 48 hours, I took it from nothing to 1,800, 1,900 impressions. It went from an idea and a concept. I ground the thing out. I used determination and grit and desire to want to produce an end product, and it went out. And it resonated with a fair number of people. I keep getting messages from people saying, you had an impact on me early in my career. I appreciate hearing your voice and showing up as the person that I know that you are. I appreciate how you're helping people. Like, to me, that's my healing. That's my grieving. That's me still getting over the loss of two very, very important people in my life. And it's turned it into a positive. It's turned it into a way that I can help put back into other people. And I don't care if people don't like it. I don't care if it fails and it falls flat on its face, because I'm doing this for me and I'm hoping it helps people along the way. You know, in the last episode, I talked about attitude. I talked about how it's your choice and it's the one thing that you can control. When you're vulnerable, your attitude is going to be the driver behind how you show up after opening yourself. So when you're vulnerable and you tell stories, you talk about vulnerability is not just bad. So let me get that straight. Vulnerability is not telling people all the bad stuff. It's telling people that you love them instead of just thinking that they're going to continue to show up in your life. It's telling people that you appreciate them. It's getting deeply personal with them. And, again, you stay within healthy boundaries, right? But be you. Show appreciation for other people. Tell them how much you appreciate them. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be natural and raw in who you authentically are. Vulnerability is not just about the bad stuff. It's not just about the skeletons and the scars and all the crap. I can't change what happened to me, just like you can't change what's happened to you. Everything that's happened in your life has prepared you and created who you are today. That's who you are today. Your attitude and your choices moving forward are ultimately going to decide who you continue to show up as and who you are trying to work towards, your goals, your aspirations, your desires, the people you want around your life. That's all attitude. That's all personal choice. And that is all within your control. I encourage you to lean into your friends, lean into your family, find mentors, seek professionals, people that are better than you. Seek out who it is that you want to be. Seek out those that are showing up in your life the way that you want to show up for other people. I don't want you to just survive. I truly want you to thrive. I want you to be able to talk about it. I encourage you to normalize the conversation about who you are, all of it, good and bad. It's going to make other people uncomfortable. And that's okay, because you have to get uncomfortable yourself before you can ever experience any type of growth, whether it's grief, trauma, it doesn't matter. You have to be uncomfortable first. But it's also relatable because we're all going through it. Every one of us has a story. Every one of us has crap that's happened to us. It's also going to build trust. When people start to see you show up as who you authentically are, they trust you. You have to make that okay. That's what I'm doing. When I show up in my elected role as mayor, people see me in that capacity the same as I show up in my circle of friends. I'm not a different person. You might not like the flavor. You might not like my approach. You might appreciate it. It might be your thing, but it's me. And it's only me. I'm not doing it for anybody else. I'm not showing up a certain way because I need to be somebody for somebody else. I'm showing up as me because that's what I need to heal. That's what I need to impact society. It's one thing to say that I want to inspire others to aspire to change the world. It's another to show up and do the work and actually try and change the world. And that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast. That's what I'm trying to do through my community outreach and my volunteerism, is I want to show up so that you see somebody that you trust, that you can believe in, that you relate to, and ultimately that you see some form of yourself in me. And if I can help you in that process, I'm here to do so. Don't forget, I believe in you. I believe that you can become the best version of yourself, and I'm here to help. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and that you found it to be both insightful and informative at the same time. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you. Go be amazing and help others on the way. God bless. Thank you again for listening. And remember, this podcast will only be made possible with your continued support. Please follow on Spotify, like and follow, subscribe to all my socials. Please share this podcast with your friends. And above all, I appreciate you. This is No Singular Solutions.